This whole webinar series is brought to you by FAU's Postdoctoral Association, as well as the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs. Please remember that since we are on webinar mode, your video and audio will not be available, but we want all of your questions. So please use the Q&A button down at the bottom and go ahead and submit your questions anytime during the webinar. And then at the end of the webinar, I will go through all the questions and ask them to our presenter today. And our presenter, I'm happy to introduce, is Camille Coley, JD CRA. She's currently the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, where she oversees the international and federal relation programs and special projects for the museum. Previously, she was the Associate Vice President for Research at Florida Atlantic University, where she was responsible for day-to-day operations of the Division of Research, including the offices of sponsored programs, research accounting, and research development. At FAU, she also served as the Associate Director of the Southeast National Marine Renewable Energy Center. She has served as a member of the Federal Advisory Committee for the U.S. Global Climate Program, and was a member of the Florida Task Force for Climate Change. She received her Juris Doctorate from the University of Maryland School of Law and attended Towson University Communications and the University of Virginia for Chemical Engineering as an undergraduate. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, David, for the introduction. Thanks, Gina, for organizing everything. I really appreciate being back at FAU, at least virtually. I see some people that I recognize from my previous life. I want to say hi to those folks and go Owls. And I'm glad to meet those of you that I do not know, but I'm hoping to know better after this presentation today. So I am going to hopefully share my screen. Second, perfect. So I'm hoping everyone can see my screen and we'll get started. So I'm here to talk about research development opportunities or opportunities in research development and what a great career option it is for many, many people. I know many research development professionals across the country, and they always beam and talk about what a rewarding career it is. And first want to talk a little bit about, the nuts and bolts of what research development is, and then I'll get into some broader aspects of skills that you need for being a research development professional. But first, I wanted to start by saying, as you can see, I'm currently the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And the reason everyone quotes New York City is because of the fact that many people think we're the Natural Museum, the Museum of Natural History, the National Museum, and that's in Washington, D.C., which is part of the Smithsonian Institute system. I actually was on the phone with an ambassador to a country who shall remain nameless, and he's like, "Oh, I'll stop by and visit." And I'm like, "I don't think you can stop by and visit today. It's a 3-hour train ride," but that's a story for another day. I was hired to help position the museum for future success for government grant proposals. The museum decided a few years back that it wanted to expand its research grant getting and expand its research portfolio using its curators. The museum is an interesting animal. I came from higher education, as you'll see later in my talk. And one of the things that attracted me to this particular position is that this museum is the only one in the Western Hemisphere that offers graduate degrees. We confer PhD degrees in comparative biology, as well as Masters of Science degrees in teaching, specifically in earth science. We have the Richard Gilder Graduate School, which is an accredited institution and body. We have a small number of students, but we have about 30 curators, which you would consider PIs in a traditional higher education institution, and about within those 3,200 active researchers within our institutions. That gives you a little bit of background about where I am. So I share this cartoon with you. I find it funny because it not only applies to academia as an academician, as a professor, associate professor, and the like, but it also applies to research development. I have a colleague, and she used to, or had young children when we first started working together, and she did her best work at night. And that used to disturb people because she would send out her emails and her comments on their proposals in the evening. But yeah, research development allows you the opportunity to work, to fit your schedule in some ways. And what's been wonderful about us going online with COVID is that we, as research development professionals, have worked remotely and with electronic research administration for a very long time. So it was a seamless operation for us to transition when we were all sent home to work. So, it's a metaphorical fork in the road that you're at as a postgraduate research student, and that you have to figure out at this point, whether you're going to stay in academia once you finish your studies, or should you go off and venture into other areas. And of course, the decision is hugely personal, and it'll depend on your interests and your likes and your dislikes and, your life and career goals and your family. And there's no one size fits all answer. And ultimately, it's only you who can decide what you want in your working life and your job and your career and what will give you the most satisfaction. However, there are some alternatives, and I'm here to talk about, what that might look like in terms of research development. So this this clinical definition of research development comes from a colleague of mine, Dr. Samarpita Sengupta. She's at the University of Texas Southwest Medical Center, and she describes research development as encompassing a set of strategic, proactive, catalytic, and capacity building activities designed to facilitate individual faculty members, and on and on and on. So that's the clinical definition of it. But what it really is, a broad spectrum of activities that vary by institution. It includes funding opportunities, identification of funding opportunities, and target dissemination of those opportunities. Grant and contract and proposal development, research team building, interaction with funding agencies and sponsors, and institutional research administration and leadership within your institution, interacting with your institutional government relations office, outreach activities, training, and different research development offices are set up in different ways across the country. There's, again, no one size fits all. When we started the research development office at FAU, we started with the idea of hiring grant facilitators, and we were going to share these grant facilitators with the colleges. So the offer to the colleges was that they would pay for half of the salary of the grant facilitators, and our office would pay for the other half. Well, lo and behold, the colleges had an idea of what they thought a grant facilitator was. And in many cases, they just wanted somebody to write the grants for them and not really facilitate them and provide ideation and facilitation of the grants. And that's what we were really after out of the Division of Research. So what ended up happening is we ended up hiring the grant facilitators in our office and started working with specific colleges on their research development activities. And, by the end of my tenure at FAU, the colleges were very hungry to work with our grant facilitators, specifically on team science proposals and large interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary proposals. So what do research professionals do? I get this question all the time, and it could be anything and everything every day. I don't know what's going to befall me when I walk through the door on most days. I mean, I do have, our office is still deadline driven, as proposals have a deadline that they're due. But in terms of how the sausage making happens, how the work gets done, it varies from situation to situation and proposal to proposal. You know, you're working to nurture those critical partnerships and alliances through the work that you do. You're working with external stakeholders. You're working to enable individuals and research teams to facilitate research. And you're building, you know, strategic services and collaborative resources that span across all of the disciplines within your institution, and breaking down some of those administrative barriers to make proposal submission a lot easier. The example that I have most recently at the museum is we worked on a large scale, or not large scale, but a mid-scale research infrastructure project. And what it involved was a lot of the education work that we were doing. We were creating a platform so that the educators at the museum would have expansive networks and capacity to be able to administer programs online to the vast student population that we deal with. The museum has a large network of educational programming from pre-K all the way through graduate education that I described before. And so we need a lot of capacity in order to be able to administer those programs. And so, you know, we worked across the institution with our educators, with our scientists to develop that proposal, and many conversations, many conflicts, but conflicts that were resolvable because my office stepped in and helped discuss and describe what it would take in order to get the proposal prepared and submitted and ultimately funded. The other example I can tell you about in terms of you know, what research professionals do, we decided to apply for National Aeronautic and Space Administration, NASA proposal. We have a lot of funding from NASA at the museum. We have a large planetarium, the Hayden Planetarium, and we run an operation or a program called Open Space, which is an open platform for planetary science and doing and experiencing planetary science in an educational setting. But we wanted to do a project that promoted grant facilitation in our youth. And so we partnered with the Michigan Science Center. The Michigan Science Center, I would say, is a medium-sized science center in the Detroit area with similar demographics in an urban environment to New York City. But we wanted to show that we could create programs for youth grant facilitators, floor facilitators that would work with the public coming into our spaces. And the museum, the Michigan Museum, did not have a lot of capacity or did not have experience working with NASA. So we helped them from the ideation stage through the proposal development stage to the budget preparation stage and to the actual submission. My director of grants actually helped the counterpart at the Michigan Science Center to actually submit. So that capacity building, working with teams and other teams was very instrumental in the submission of that grant, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that proposal gets funded. So I'm going to talk a little bit about exploring careers in research development, what the career options look like, the key skills you need to advance in research development. You know, as a postdoc, you have certain skills and training that you have, and I want to talk about how you translate that into a career for research development and how you grow and build a career in research development. So first, I'll start off by talking a little bit about my career journey. As you realize, I probably don't have a similar background as many of you who have gone, you know, traditional route in earning, you know, an undergrad degree, a master's, and a PhD. I instead, you know, earned a Juris Doctorate. But this journey that I'm getting ready to take you on will show you how I picked up skills along the way to create a toolbox to be successful in research development. So I started my career out of law school in the general counsel's office at the Maryland Public Service Commission, working on utility policy issues, specifically on oil and gas issues and on appellate cases. One of the main cases that I worked on was a case with Colonial Pipeline. They had been denied permission to lay natural gas pipes in the Chesapeake Bay, which is an environmentally sensitive area. We were able to keep them from doing that. And so they decided to move their operations to Florida. Box number 2. I got a call from the governor's office and they said, we heard what you did in Maryland. Would you be willing to come down to Florida to talk to us and consult? My colleagues that worked at the Florida Public Service Commission had always fascinated me because I'd been tracking the no drilling policy along the coastline in Florida, just as a policy matter. And so worked on the Colonial Pipeline case in Florida. They ended up not laying pipe in the fish beds and the shellfish beds on the panhandle and moved on. I'm sure many of you have heard the name Colonial recently, and there are other debacle that happened. But anyway, the work that I was doing on a Colonial Pipeline case led me to work with a lot of people who deal with environmental issues and coastal management and coastal policy issues, and landed a job as the community program administrator for the Florida Coastal Management Program, which is funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. All of the states with coastlines, 35 of them have coastal management programs that are funded by NOAA that work on public issues around coastal management, as well as policy and development issues around coastal management issues. From there, I landed a job at a think tank on coastal management at the University of Rhode Island at their Coastal Resources Center, where I managed the East Africa portfolio. The Coastal Resources Center does Rhode Island-based coastal management work, but also has an international portfolio in Southeast Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, and the East Africa. And I managed the East Africa work. We were funded for about $15 million in coastal management. And that's where I learned a lot about sponsoring agencies, working on cooperative agreements, and understanding the work that's done by the program manager and how to manage large-scale projects with government funding. From there, I moved back to Florida as the FAU decided to launch its research enterprise in a fuller manner. Before, it had a sponsored programs office, and its research accounting office was housed in another part of the university. But we created a division of research in 2001 and brought everybody underneath one umbrella. Spent many years developing that office, but also started working not on individual proposals, but on large scale proposals. We launched a couple of large centers of excellence out of that office, but also launched, as I talked a little bit about before, the first research development office. Which then led me to this job at the museum, working at a nonprofit, an area of expertise I didn't have before. Learned a lot about the development operations in a not-for-profit, as well as bringing the skill sets that I had in research development and research administration to bear on the position at the museum. So when you're exploring research development as an option, before you consider applying for research development careers, for any career, you need to explore what those career options are and choose what's the best fit for you in terms of your research interests and your goals and your values. Before I go to work at an institution, I make sure that I am, aligned with the mission and the vision of that institution and the values, and so that, there's not a mismatch and I'm not running for the hills in a short period of time after I get into the institution and work there for a while. I look for opportunities where I have long-term careers and long-term investment within that institution, and think that I can be helpful within that institution. You need to start thinking about, your career advancement early. That's the picture about up in the corner. What is your dream job? What do you ultimately want to do? Do you want to be a vice president for research? Do you want to manage a research development office? What is it that you're really ultimately seeking? And how can you use the tools you already have, or how can you use the tools that are available to get there? So, doing some informational interviews, finding people that are already in the field, and speaking to them, using the career counseling office at FAU, talking to this, your postgraduate office. And the other resource that I really like is the American Association for the Advancement of Science's website, the AAAS website on science careers. I know that some of you may not be in a science background or in a science discipline, but this website, I actually use it for myself because it has some wonderful tools for thinking about your career and planning your career. I actually have a mentor who talked to me recently about how she planned her career. She's in the sunset of her career, but she remembers, pasting butcher block paper, like construction paper, all across her room and mapping out what it is that she wanted to do. And you can do it on a computer now. I told her that, but she said it was really valuable, and she went back and restructured it and rethought about it many times. And just seeing it in front of her, I think that was the point that the butcher block really helped her. Or seeing it constantly in her apartment was helpful as she thought about what it is and envisioned what she ultimately wanted to do. So the questions you need to ask yourself, about your can you hear me now? Someone was asking. Not sure.
I can hear you, so I'm not sure. I mean, I can, but apparently Maria cannot.
Because I haven't changed anything, so I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll continue. The questions you need to ask yourself about, as you're searching for your next career is, what do you really want to do? What do you want to learn? Do you like writing? Do you like helping with others? Is there something you want to avoid doing? I remember on one of my first job interviews, they asked, what do I want to do? And I said, I know what I don't want to do. And that's a real clear definition of how you want to proceed, with the advancement of your career. Do you prefer being part of a team? Do you like working alone? Do you see yourself as a leader or manager? In what areas do you want to work? Do you want to work in academia? Do you want to work in pharma, a for-profit environment? Is it government that interests you? And I highly suggest that people start looking at government careers again. They are wonderful careers. I know we lost a lot of great scientists and policymakers through the last couple of years, and government is very hungry to have talented people back in their ranks. So I put a plug in for looking at government careers. Or do you want to work at a nonprofit? Like I'm working in there are pluses and minuses of working in a nonprofit. It's kind of like working in academia, that you're working on a shoestring and you're working from project to project, but there are great rewards in working for nonprofit organizations. Do you want a stable job? Do you want something that's 9 to 5 and specifically cut off like that? Are you comfortable with changing and moving and working with different constituencies and different organizations? It's sort of that gig economy, whether you want to work from project to project. How do you handle stress? I wouldn't say research development is high stress, but it's deadline driven. So recognizing that that you need to have time in order to think about what the ideas are for a project and flesh those ideas out and get those ideas down on paper and then obviously submit on time in order to be able to get the funding that you're seeking. And you need to look at what do you offer in terms of the skills and expertise and ability that you gained through your academic and working career. So there are 4 key competencies I'd like to say in research development, career advancement. It's that strategic planning, communications, and collaboration, and that team science is number 3. And number 4 are those proposal support functions. And this is how I like to lay it out in terms of a chart for people to think about what they're doing. Thinking about your current work experience. As an early career researcher, it may be challenging to think about what professional skills you have, but you likely already have some of the skills that are laid out in this chart, and they undoubtedly relate to the career, the skills that you need for a career in research. One skill in particular I'd like to point out is conflict management. There are inevitably conflicts, and just having some skills and being able to manage those conflicts and helping people to find resolution has been a valuable skill for me in particular in navigating particularly projects where you have a lot of strong personalities in the room in the preparation of a proposal. So you also need to think about what skills are transferable, what skills, that the larger job market you would need. One of the things that I like to do is, as I said, go to that science, the AAAS website, the Science Careers website. They have the ability to, or they have a tool that you can use. It's an individual development plan, and you can assess your transferability skills or your transferable skills using this IDP plan tool. And I highly recommend it. So, you as a postdoc have probably gained skills in organizing experiments and possibly writing grant proposals, and definitely writing papers and doing presentations and working with others in your lab and working with others in other labs, and those are definitely transferable to a career in research development. So in terms of opportunities for skill building during your postdoc, these are a couple of things that I recommend. There are multiple opportunities online and in person to develop new skills, but attending career development workshops like the one I'm presenting today, joining and engaging in your professional societies or finding professional societies in research development that I'll talk about a little bit later. Building and nurturing relationships with multiple colleagues at different levels is important. I like to think about the fact that I don't have a mentor per se, but I have a board of directors that I depend on for different things in my career advancement and my career development. So I have mentors and have had mentors that have offered advice and guidance throughout my career. I've also had sponsors, people who were in key positions within my institution that could influence or elevate my career. And then I've had, straight out advocates or champions who, have represented me to others and have represented my skills to others. Want to go back to the sponsors. So I have a colleague at Texas Tech University who talks about a sponsor that she had who was the CFO of the organization. And this person, she didn't know, she knew the person, but they had a collegial relationship, but didn't realize that the person was really a sponsor for her until there was a situation where they were talking about salary, and this person advocated for a salary increase for her. And having that person influence and elevate her career in that way has been so instrumental in building her confidence, but also in building her career. Participating in service and leadership activities in the organization, not just in your lab or in your college, but across the institution. If there are opportunities to do that, I highly recommend it. When I was in the Division of Research, I did take advantage of opportunities, and one in particular that I was reluctant to do was to help with the SACS, the Southeastern Accreditation process for FAU. And that was one of the best experiences that I ever had in terms of skill development and the growth of my skills in terms of learning more about, the institutional metrics, in terms of learning more about the quantitative and qualitative data that's collected across the institution. But that information was very helpful in my development and my ideation of new proposals that were coming out of the Division of Research at that time. And my other piece of advice, which I'm sure you've heard often, is to network everywhere you go. I have two soccer playing children, and I network on the soccer field. I am a team manager and also a ref. So in networking, tips for effective networking: be yourself. I hope it came across today that I am always myself. Can't be anybody else, don't want to be anybody else. And, start where you're comfortable, start with people that are in your sphere that you may not necessarily know. I know for some folks like me, I'm an introvert extrovert. I'm traditionally an introvert, but can be extroverted, but would prefer to talk to people that I know, but stretch yourself a little bit in some cases. Develop that elevator pitch, being able to introduce yourself in layman's language and not in technical terms to the folks around you, and being strategic, targeting individuals and organizations where you aspire to work and reaching out to them. I have a colleague who is aspiring to launch a intermodal transportation company, and his goal was to meet Richard Branson. He targeted Richard Branson and Virgin Atlantic and reached out to him. It took about a year, but Richard actually reached back out to him. And this colleague will soon be launching, the company of his dreams. So I'm not necessarily advocating going that far, but do target individuals and organizations and have those aspirational goals. Being honest and direct, that's pretty straightforward. Follow up, staying connected. I reach out to people often. I reach out to people with opportunities that may not fit for my institution, but I think their institution might be interested in. And also, looking back. It's not just looking forward for yourself, but looking back, being a resource and helping others and making introductions and being. So in terms of your postdoc training and career advancement, I'm sure that you've gained some technical skills, some conceptual knowledge skills, communication skills through publications and presentation, leadership and management skills in the lab, expanding your professional network. And those are all great things that help advance your career in research development, should you be interested in such a career. So your postdoctoral experience should prepare you for that transition from being a trainee to an independent professional, where, in whatever space you decide to move into. So, as is true for any job, there are multiple places to look for positions, and positions in research and development pop up all the time. You should explore the possibilities on social media. The organizations that I've listed below have pages on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. So I'm a member of the National Organization of Research Development Professionals, and so is Karen Scarpinato, who is I think she's the senior Associate Vice President of Research now. So reach out to her if you're interested in the organization and learning more about it. But we are a band of over 400 and maybe 600 now, if I remember correctly, professionals in the research development space. We meet annually for conferences. There are regional meetings. There's a few affinity groups. I'm actually a member of the evaluators group, where we go out and do consultations for universities that are interested in growing or starting research development offices. There's the National Council for Research Administrators and CURA, the Society for Research Administrators. University websites have opportunities out of the research offices and sponsored programs offices, and there are opportunities in foundations as well. So your skills plus the employer needs equal your value. So in terms of preparing your application materials, resumes are the way to go in research and development. I actually was on the listserv the other day, and one person recommended a one-page resume. I'm not sure that I can get mine down that far, but in research development, I mean, they are looking at the totality of your skill sets, but you don't necessarily need a complete CV with, you know, all of your publications and all of your presentations. It's more about highlighting the strengths that you have and highlighting those skills and experiences that you have that are most important. Your application materials need to show, you know, the skills that meet the employer's needs and therefore be tailored to that specific position. And you might have multiple versions of your CV depending on the positions and the institution that you're applying to. So I think that talks a little bit about in terms of, you know, building your CV, in terms of matching those skills and experience that are relevant, you know, highlighting those transferable skills that I talked about before. And the last thing is about formatting, you know, for ease and using white space and all of those other sorts of things on a resume, more similar to what the National Science Foundation is doing in terms of bio sketches. I mean, they're 2 pages, and that's really what research development hiring authorities are really looking for, to be able to scan and be able to find people who would work well in research development offices. So in terms of building a research development career, you know, to be competitive, you need writing skills, interpersonal skills, time management skills, budget skills, leadership skills, and you need to continue to expand those mentoring, sponsoring, and advocacy teams that you build, and they need to progress and change over time as you're growing in your career. You need to remember that the skills that you acquire in your PhD and postdoc training are transferable to almost any job inside and outside of academia. So engaging in opportunities, training opportunities is also important to support your short-term and long-term goals. So in wrapping up, as NSF likes to say, apply early and often, start early, you know, in your career exploration. Waiting until the last minute is not to your benefit. And it is definitely sort of hair raising when you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm about to graduate, what should I do? So, you know, starting to think about it now is very important to planning, and also thinking about strategically where you're going next. You know, network, as I said before, can't understate that. Network. You know, in order to meet those mentors and advisors and sponsors that I spoke about earlier. You know, identify and secure positions that best fit your career goals. That was my point about, you know, really do your homework about an organization and what their values are, to make sure that they are aligned with, you know, what you want to do in the future, and continue to build on those transferable skills that I laid out in the chart earlier. The one last thing that I will say about research development careers is that the pandemic has been a blessing in a lot of ways in terms of being able to do these jobs remotely. You know, people with young careers or other, you know, things that are going on in their life, these remote opportunities have been very helpful. And research development provides opportunities for people to work remotely. I've seen many opportunities come across across my email and listservs that allow for remote work, allow for flexibility, and allow for opportunities for people to have a hybrid environment and really work in ways that they want to work, and allow for a work-life balance that many people are looking for. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today. And I guess I'm open to any questions at this point, David.
Okay, sounds good. Camera back. Well, I have a couple questions, and I know some questions will come into the Q&A as we continue going. Somebody did ask how to find career opportunities, but you already covered that one slide.
And you'll have my slides, so I'm assuming that you can share those, so
Yes.
that people didn't have to copy things down or think that they missed something.
Right. No, I still write down every word that I can. So when it comes to development of all these kind of the research opportunities and helping people apply for these various grants and building the infrastructure for these, are you kind of like working from the bottom up with these, or is there kind of already like guidelines in place as to how to build the infrastructure for these applications for research? That makes any
I
sense?
have a template that I use, and each office is different. So normally when I'm working with a faculty member, or even a team of faculty members, it works both ways. Sometimes they'll come to me with an opportunity that they already have in mind, and we will walk through that opportunity. I mean, the first line of defense for me always is figuring out if we are even eligible to apply, and working backward from there. The template that I use is actually going through the solicitation line by line, after I get over that eligibility hurdle, to figure out what's necessary for that proposal. And most proposals, particularly from government agencies, the program officers will tell you they work very hard on those guidelines. You really need to read them. They will tell you straight out, did you read the guidelines? And I do read guidelines as a hobby. No, I read guidelines from start to finish, to make sure that we're not missing anything, that we're not overlooking anything. A lot of agencies have gone to doing webinars on their solicitations. So making sure you tune into those webinars, or at least listening to the recordings of those webinars, because they drop kernels in those webinars that aren't necessarily in the solicitation. So reading those guidelines thoroughly is an incredibly and important exercise in research development, and then laying out what the goals are of that particular solicitation, and what they're after. They really, those program officers work very hard to define that information and to share that information with potential applicants. I mean, they're willing to answer questions, but so use that as your starting point. So I usually work that up and work up a framework and sit down with the individual PI or the team and walk through that and make sure there aren't any questions. If there are questions, then we set up time to talk to the program officer. Program officers don't bite. They really are nice people. And if you're going through a solicitation and you have a question, email them. If you don't get a response back, call them up. They really do try to be as responsive as they can. They can be, your best friends at certain points in time. So that's the way I like to work. And then from there, once we have that basic outline, then, we start idealizing about, what it is, what we could do to answer this call. Do a lot of facilitating with rooms with, we've been doing it online mostly, but sticky notes and all sorts of things, and working through Google Docs and sharing ideas that way. And the other thing that I highly recommend is weekly meetings, especially in the beginning of writing a proposal. And if you're not familiar with someone's working style, that regular contact is incredibly important.
Gotcha. So So generally like you said, the PIs will come to you with opportunities. Do you also spend time trying to look
Well, I
for
was going
them?
to say the reverse is true also,
Okay.
that, that I do a lot of sleuthing of opportunities. Some opportunities are shared on some of those sites that I mentioned before, but, a lot of times, grants.gov has opportunities, research.gov lists opportunities. There are many spaces where opportunities are posted. And I also, some of the agencies actually have their own newsletters. So signing up for the agency alerts is really important. And there at FAU, you had Grants Forward. I don't know if Karen's still on, but there is we used to have it used to be community of science. I forgot what it turned into, but we have Grants Forward now, which does the same thing, where you can put in, where your interest areas lie, and, targeted emails are sent out. When I was at FAU, I did do a lot of searching for opportunities, and did do a lot of personal emails, which required some coaxing sometimes of faculty members to apply for grants. But, once we got over that hurdle and got the submission in, and then the award happened, there were happy days for everyone.
This might not be a question you're comfortable with answering, but is there like some government agents, like what's your favorite government agency to actually apply for that you kind of like, I like the way their system works, and
I would say NSF.
Okay.
I would absolutely say NSF. And it's just that they have developed a process that makes a lot of logical sense to me, at least in particular, in the way that they structure their opportunities, and the straightforwardness of their opportunities. The other agencies, I'm not discounting any other agencies. I'm just saying that NSF is very formulaic in how it puts out its opportunities, and a lot of the other government agencies follow suit behind them, except for NASA, which is its own animal.
Why is that?
They decided to go it alone. They don't use grants.gov. They use Inspires for their submission process. So they have a whole different beast in terms of how you submit to their particular agencies.
Gotcha. Okay. So I do have a question from an anonymous attendee. So what this person is saying is that they've generally been only in the research track in their PhD education, which is probably true for most of us. They're kind of asking what sort of opportunities are available I'm assuming, in the research track outside of academia. Kind of like for instance, you have the curators at the museum. How does one get into that sort of position, or other research driven positions that aren't academia?
A lot of those positions, from what I understand, at least at the museum per se, are they're not necessarily advertised, but they are talked about at professional conferences. So, our curators are out talking, and presenting at conferences. So looking at, who's attending a conference, and finding folks in that space. I will share with you, we have an amazing curator at the American Museum of Natural History who came from FAU. She at least did her undergrad or master's degree. Her name is Ashley Hammond. And I don't know where Ashley did her PhD work, but she's now a curator of physical anthropology at the museum. And, she talks about the fact that she ended up meeting one of the curators at a conference. So conferences are the best way to go. And again, as I said, if there's an institution that you want to work at, and reach out to someone who works there. Please don't be afraid of reaching out. The worst they can do, as my mother said, is say no. But in most cases, most people are very willing to be helpful. And if they can't be helpful, to guide you to another source that can be helpful. So, finding those institutions, and then, again, looking for people that work there, and starting a dialogue with them is one way I suggest going.
Gotcha. Thank you. Apparently, I read that question wrong. They meant positions kind of outside of research. Like how do we get outside of the research track?
How do you get outside of research? It's like, it's again that volunteering yourself sometimes for those opportunities that aren't necessarily in your space. At least at FAU, there are, you'll hear about, larger, you may hear in your lab about some proposals that are being written, and I would contact the research office and find out, who's working on that proposal and would they be willing to make an introduction to, who's working on that proposal, and start a conversation from there. You just don't know where that conversation will lead.
Thank you. So this is an interesting question. How do we have all these transferable skills, as you're saying, how do you kind of prove that you have these skills, or you have time management, budget skills to become competitive in the market? Is it kind of, you're telling them in your CV, or is there kind
You're
of
telling
anything?
and showing. I mean, you still are going to demonstrate, well, I worked, in this lab on this particular project and we did XYZ. You can do it in your cover letter and say, we had a deadline and we did this, we did X, we did Y, we did Z, we met the deadlines, we met the reporting. These are the outcomes, these are in, and then say, these skills are very translatable to, developing proposals in other spaces. One of the things I like to talk about is one of the grant facilitators that I hired had a PhD, or has a PhD in English. And so she was incredibly valuable and worked in different colleges because she had a superior command of the English language, but enough knowledge to be able to work across various disciplines and various spaces. And, to the person who asked the question, you may be thinking, oh, I am, totally focused on biology. Biology is all I know. I only know how to, do, work in the lab with test tubes and things like that. But no, that's not the case. You've been talking to colleagues, you've been working with colleagues, and your logic and your ability to know science is transferable to other spaces. As David mentioned in the beginning, I've worked with the Southeast National Marine Renewable Energy Center, which was housed in the College of Engineering. I don't have a PhD in engineering, but I know enough to get me in trouble. And I actually became an engineering whisperer because I could speak the engineering language enough to be able to translate it to layman's language and to be able to write a proposal that was funded for $10 million to support the center. So, don't box yourself in and think this is all I know, because you may have that base knowledge, but that base knowledge and how you form your logic or how you think about the problem solving is transferable to another space.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for any certifications? Places to get certifications that kind of prove these skills?
So that's an interesting question because, we feel like in the research development space, I'm actually on a committee that's talking about research development certifications. I am what CRA is, a certified research administrator, which means I know the whole operation from pre-award to post-award to tech transfer from soup to nuts. But we're thinking about offering a research development certificate. And we thought that, people who had already, gotten their masters and PhDs didn't want to necessarily do another certificate program, because you really do have, you're thinking you don't have the skills, but you do. It's just that you have to do the job sometimes. And you have to be able to sell yourself to be able to do the job. So, again, it's back to thinking about, so what did I do, as I was preparing for this experiment? What skills did I use, and how can I put that in lay language in order for that to translate into something that, would be important as a research development professional?
Cool. Thank you. Somebody had a question. When you're pursuing an RD career, you actually had a little bit of international experience. How important is it to kind of explore international work, and how do you get those opportunities?
So, mine came in a very different way in working at, like I said, the think tank. In terms of international opportunities, for somebody who is really domestically focused, finding organizations that have a domestic, an international subgroup to them, and joining that subgroup, you can learn a lot just participating in those subgroups and hearing what's going on from their perspective. And I think that's one entree point into it. I know that the National Council for University Research Administrators has an international group, and most groups have, some type of international subgroup that's related to them and participating in that way. At least as a taste of it. I can't tell you necessarily how to immerse yourself. It's again, finding people who, have worked in international spaces and talking to them and getting references from them and introductions from them to other people who work internationally.
Gotcha.
And well,
So
and I was going to say, in South Florida, you've got so many, again, it's that whole networking. You've got so many people coming through South Florida, like we do here in New York City, that you just never know who you're going to meet or who you're going to run into and what their background and experience is.
Gotcha. So when it comes to making these connections, sometimes you're kind of cold emailing somebody on LinkedIn, or contacting on LinkedIn, cold emailing. What's your suggestion?
Yeah, I do that sometimes, but a lot of times I will talk in my network to see if I know someone, first of all.
Okay.
So in fact, ironically, for this presentation, I was a little bit afraid to give this presentation because I've never been a postdoc, although I've worked with postdocs. So I didn't, want to talk down to anybody, but I did, I wanted to give you guys a full breadth of what it is to be, a research development professional. But I called somebody who does, my colleague at University of Texas, the medical center, and she does postdoc work. So, putting something out there sometimes on a listserv saying, I'm looking for somebody who, has experience in this space. And, a lot of times someone will raise their hand and offer assistance.
Thank you. When it comes to you have to translate a lot of sciences when it comes to these applications and things like that. How for someone, I work in bioinformatics, and it's very high, lots of words. Even bioinformatics, most people don't necessarily understand. What's your kind of best suggestion to kind of translating the sciences? Is it more contacting somebody like somebody at research or development that could help you translate? Is that something you guys really help with?
Yeah, I do highly recommend it. Because we talk to sponsors all the time. What you have to realize in the review panels is that you may not get somebody who's in your specific disciplines. You need to be able to speak to them. As I was saying, that I became an engineering whisperer, you really need to be able to translate what it is that the scientist and researcher is saying into language that's understandable by most. Your reviewers are going to have a high level of experience and expertise, but you still need to be able to explain to them in a way that they'll understand what it is that you're trying to do. And that's where a research development professional can come in and help you with a fresh eye and think about what it is. My staff in my office, a lot of times, will write something and it goes both ways, that we'll share it. It's like, does this mean the same thing to you? And so having another set of eyes on the work that you're doing is critically important in proposal writing.
Gotcha. Cool. We have hit 5 o'clock. So if does anybody, last call for any questions to put into the Q&A. But it's been awesome. I greatly appreciate your time and your knowledge with everything. With today, it was very educational for me. This is something
you and anybody else, feel free to reach out to me. I'm available to answer questions and to do any follow-up. I'm very accessible, and I definitely love to support my owls in any way that I can.
Thank you. Yeah, everybody's saying thank you, and it's very informative.
You're
And
welcome.
your email will be that somebody has asked to post your email. Is that something? We'll have your email as part of your presentation when we put it up.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. But I can, if you wouldn't mind typing it into the chat really quick. Or that's just the host and panelist.
I know you see it, but I don't know if anybody else.
So everybody who's listening, ccoley@amnh.org is Neil's email. Thank you for providing that.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Camille.
Bye.